Displays are kind of a key area of interest for me. At CES, they were a very key area of interest for me last year, which was our first time at CES, myself and Alex, because displays are always evolving and there are new buzzwords, new keywords. We're familiar with QLED, OLED, mini LED, micro LED, all kinds of different acronyms that get thrown around here, and it's kind of hard to keep track of them, but sometimes the acronyms do have some meaning. And this year we were introduced to a new acronym, which is microRGB. From some vendors, from Samsung and LG, they'll tell you it's microRGB. Other vendors like Hisense will say it's RGB mini LED. And I think that latter moniker is more accurate because microRGB sounds very similar to micro LED, which is not at all the same. It's actually very, very different in terms of the display technology there. So this is an interesting concept. Basically, the whole idea here is basically it's a mini LED TV. I mean, I'm simplifying it somewhat, but it's a mini LED TV, but with an RGB backlight. Instead of a white backlight, we end up with an RGB backlight. Now, why is that important? It means that you can have very high color vibrancy, at least in test patterns, because you can actually display that full vibrant color. You're not just relying on the filter, you're actually getting it from the backlight as well. That's quite good. Again, that's in test content. In real world content, where you might have a limited number of dimming zones, might have a limited number of backlight zones there, and you might have content that actually has wildly contrasting colors, has some interesting color arrangements there, you might not actually get that full color vibrancy. But at least in test patterns, it can satisfy the full BT 2020 standard, which most televisions are not nearly capable of achieving, unfortunately. Of course, there isn't much BT 2020 test content, but that is potentially one advantage.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of it, it's still the dimming zone based, and you could end up in, at least in theory, although we didn't see this unfortunately with the test content, which perhaps you can talk about a little bit. Yeah. But in theory, if there's like very fast movement, because you do actually have different colors behind that color filter, you might end up with some unpleasant combinations of colors that could lead to some really ugly artifacts. At least in theory, lead to some kind of smearing and perhaps video game content, which obviously is of some concern of ours.
Yeah, we don't know. Basically, they're demonstrating these things on very fast cutting, right. Sometimes not ultra. They're very vibrant, but that doesn't mean like it's showing the contrast and like movement that you'd expect in a video game. And I think if it were to show like persistence or even just like pixel blur issues or motion blur issues that have like some sort of color fringing on them, which could potentially happen if there's a lag between the backlight and the real pixel movement. Like, we don't really know that right now. No. And the content was not conducive to even judging it. But the one thing that you did catch, obviously, you did catch the main thing, which was the color fringing with like some like really cool camera trickery there.
Yeah.
So you could show that off pretty well. It's not actually how it looks in person necessarily. Yeah. You're showing it in a heightened way here, but so that is something that the panels do, and I guess that is seen as a positive.
Yeah, so basically like the classic mini LED problem, if I'm going to break it down for you, our dear audience, is that basically what you end up with in mini LED panels is you end up with blooming, right? You have a limited number of backlight zones. Typically on televisions, it's going to be about 1,500 backlight zones or less. Most mini LED televisions are shipping with something in the 3-figure range. So it might be 300, might be 500 backlight zones. And these obviously lead to some blooming where you don't have that perfect control over every single individual pixel. But the key difference here with microRGB is that backlighting behavior, that blooming, is actually colored in concordance with the actual picture area that it's displaying, that it's backlight illuminating. So you end up with colored blooming, which is actually seen as a desirable element of these displays relative to just having white blooming, because in theory, if you're looking at a green kiwi and you get that green backlight glow behind it, that is actually a little bit less obtrusive, a little bit less annoying than with a white backlight element there on a mini LED television. But there is a key compromise with these televisions. It's a more expensive process to produce these televisions, right? And there's been some rumor, although I was not able to ascertain this on the show floor, nor was I able to really get any sense of it from any specifications here, that these models might actually have fewer dimming zones than their mini LED counterparts. Wow. So that's a potential concern of this new technology. I think it has some interesting elements, but it's not necessarily going to be better than mini LED in every single case.
Okay, cool. So what about OLED though? We saw a number of panels moving on from micro RGB, RGB, mini LED. We also saw a number of OLED panels, specifically at the LG booth that I was.
Yeah.
So we've been seeing OLED iterate for a number of years now, and one of the biggest thing is that, it just keeps getting brighter over time.
Right.
And that was kind of the initial impression when we saw LG's G6. I think it was like the very large 85-inch model.
83 inch.
83 inch,
Yeah.
my bad. Very, very large, so that's impressive in its own right, but you have to have the space for that, as well as the distance between you, because 4K pixels is a lot, but is it that much? Very bright. It was actually, I think it was right next to a mini LED television, if I'm not mistaken. Like here was the G6, and then I think there was a mini LED.
I think it might have been a micro RGB.
Maybe it was a micro RGB,
Yeah.
but I was like, oh, this is, and they were showing somewhat similar content. I was like, oh, this OLED looks nice and bright. Sure, that looked great. But other than other OLED TVs I've seen in the past, I couldn't appreciate the better aspects of it. I really couldn't. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it is brighter.
Yeah.
It is a really, really bright display. And you guys know that I'm a big fan of bright displays. This was a display that satisfied my eyes. I will say that. But I will say against this television possibly, the content that we're showing off is like classic HDR test content. So it's like dark screens, starry skies, extremely bright pinpoints of light. They can punch that up. And indeed in this model, I think they were talking about 3,000 nits.
It's high.
Above 3,000 nits on those highlights, which is pretty crazy here. It is a staggeringly bright television. 83 inches is quite large for an OLED. Of course, that'll probably come with an equally large price tag because OLEDs don't tend to actually be all that well suited to large sized applications. They tend to be more expensive. They don't come in the ultra large sizes. So if you're interested in a 115-inch television, if you have $30,000 burning a hole in your pocket, you're not going to find that in an OLED. It's going to be substantially smaller. It's going to be pretty expensive relative to a similarly sized mini LED. I'd suspect even a probably similarly sized micro RGB television. Those mini LED and micro RGB televisions are really intended for large picture sizes, as well as a certain other display technology we'll be touching on in a moment. But I think there was another really, really interesting display at LG's booth, which is the W6. Now the W6 is a staggering accomplishment. Basically, as far as I can tell, it's the same panel technology that we see in the G6, but it has a couple of key elements that separate it from the G6. The first and most incredible element is that it is extremely thin. We're used to seeing very thin OLEDs, but this is a uniformly thin OLED panel with, I think, a 9.9 millimeter thickness. It's in that range. They say 9 millimeter class. It is extremely thin. Indeed, I put my finger up to it, and you can see it is thinner than my index finger there. They were actually cautioning people. They were telling people not to touch it, but they did not actually see me. They did not see me touch it. I got my finger in there. I got to touch it. I touched perfection, as it were. That's a really interesting element to these panels. But obviously, OLED panels, they can get really thin. We know OLEDs can be very svelte. We've seen flexible OLEDs. OLEDs, obviously, that's a key characteristic of the OLED panel type. But the other element of it, which you actually investigated a little bit more so than myself, is the fact that these are, number one, they use wireless connectivity. So and I have some concerns of this, of my own, but perhaps we can voice those in a moment. It uses a wireless link to connect to a base station, which has your HDMI ports on it, right?
Yes.
So it does not actually have HDMI ports connected to it. It doesn't even have the One Connect box functionality, which is like one cable that goes into a box that has your HDMI, has all your ports, has your optical audio, whatever. This is a totally wireless system, and it still supports high refresh rates. It still supports 4K. That's a concern of mine. I had some problems with the One Connect box on a Samsung S95D. A couple of years ago when I tested that out. Did not work out well for me. I ended up exchanging that for my mini LED panel, which I still have today, which is quite nice. You also had an interesting bit of spelunking looking for the power cord on this unit.
It was very well hidden in the demo unit.
Yeah.
Then I kind of asked someone and they pointed it out to me. But yeah, it's kind of like hidden in the back. It's a flat power cord, I believe. So it can be hidden along a wall maybe or behind something. Not that bad. Pretty cool. Yeah.
the whole concept of this television, I think, is you want to mount it flush against something, especially if that something happens to be a piece of transparent glass, which is how they've mounted it here. It looks really, really cool. It's a very, very neat television, but I think in the critical elements of an OLED panel, your brightness, your pixel density, your panel sizes, your pixel response times, whatever, it should be identical to the G6. It's basically just a higher upmarket G6, pay a bit more, same panel, similar performance. That's what you should be getting. So it's really I was about to say vanity piece. I don't want to say it's a vanity piece. It's obviously people treat these televisions like they are pieces of art. We've seen that with the frame televisions. This seems like a extreme version of that concept. It is a very beautiful television, but if you just want picture quality, the G6 will do you just as well, if not better. And if you do have some concerns about the quality of that wireless link, I have no idea how good that will be. I would certainly have some concerns if I was putting regularly 4K 144 hertz content, 4K 120 hertz content through that, especially at high bit rates, HDR, all that good stuff. I would have some concerns with that potentially.
We don't know.
We don't know. They also showed off a transparent OLED panel, which is interesting. I'm a bit befuddled by this. I think we saw this last year as well, so it's not necessarily new, but I always wonder exactly what the audience is for this, because they're kind of transparent, but almost not in a visually compelling way. They look kind of murky, they look kind of messy, like almost like you're looking through a fish tank that hasn't been cleaned in a while.
Yeah, or just like dirty sunglasses. It's like, it's not a very, so looking through it isn't interesting. It's more like just a like a semi-interesting light phenomena that you're observing, and it's like a curiosity. Like you pointed out really well. Oh, some stuff looks more transparent than other. Like the fish and the rock look surprisingly opaque, and it's like, oh, why is that the case? I have no idea, but it's more like a visual curiosity, and I can't imagine using this for any serious amount of watching or gaming or anything other than it just be like sitting in the background in some like rich person's house.
Yeah,
it's a very strange tech, but it's cool that we can do transparent, like light emitting surfaces now and have them look reasonably, like opaque.
It's a cool tech demo, and if you were hopping around Bill Gates, Sergey Brin, their homes, maybe they might have they might have a display like this, and it is cool. And one element of it that I thought was actually pretty neat is that those fish, those bits of plant life, those bits of coral, they are quite opaque. They're very hard to see through. They do that well. They are very bright. It does look cool. It is like very thin. It is a cool looking television. I mean, I almost don't even want to call it a television. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of those fake fireplaces that people have.
Oh gosh, but those are tacky.
Those are tacky. I think this is cooler. It's about as much cooler as it is more expensive, I imagine. So that's an unfortunate element. Again, not really a display in the same way that the G6 is. The W6 is a display, but it is a cool panel, I would have to say. But I think we should move on to a display technology that has a ton of hype. Indeed, if you listen to all the prominent TV and display prognosticators on the internet, a lot of influencers out there, they will tell you that this is the future of panel technology. And this is microLED. Now, do not confuse this with microRGB. I know these names are very, very similar. MicroRGB is nothing like microLED. MicroLED, if you can think of it, it's basically a very miniaturized version of the kind of signage displays that we see in airports and convention centers. Indeed, in this footage of Alex looking wistfully towards them like he's watching Blade Runner 2049 or something. Yeah. We see those signage displays.
Just dystopic almost. In this case, the whole thing that everyone hypes about it is we love the brightness of mini LED, but we want to have higher contrast and better, deeper blacks like we see in OLED, which we don't necessarily get. And this is the solution to it. But like last year, if you recall, we had actually some somewhat negative opinion of all the micro LED displays we saw. And this year we walked up to a variety of them of different sizes. A number of them are actually ridiculously huge. And we see the exact same issue as before, where these are obviously made up of a number of constructed sub-elements of, like, let's say, I don't know how many actually it was, but imagine like 100 by 100 pixel grid, and they're all like either glued or constructed together. And these form seams in the image that are very, very visible. So they really can only be appreciated from a very far distance. This is not meant actually for like putting it in your home and watching and playing movies, films, series, games on it, because you would immediately see the large seams across the entire image, and it is not flattering at all. Like, I think all the advantages it could potentially have in other aspects of image quality just don't exist when you realize you're just like looking at it with these big seams on it, right?
Right. That's a big problem here. Indeed, depending on the set, you might notice that there's like a few big seams that might have like a kind of squared off pattern, or indeed it might be like hundreds of individual panels constructed together. With these micro-LED displays, I would say the seams are by far the biggest issue with the panels. I don't know if that's like a temporary concern, if it's like they're temporarily embarrassed by this phenomenon, and if it will improve in the future. Obviously, even just the phenomenon of cramming so many tiny little LEDs into a television, that's a pretty mammoth accomplishment, I'd have to say. But it does come with some compromises. I'm not sure necessarily they can be overcome with advanced process manufacturing technology. Like, the nature of these individual picture elements, these individual LEDs, is such there's a considerable pixel pitch around them, so they tend to look a little bit screen doory relative to other televisions, which really have much less of that screen door effect, have very minimal border between them, not really discernible in any typical use. Here it's actually quite noticeable, I would say.
Yeah, it's even like at reasonable distances we'd noticed it. It also like creates like a moire effect to a little degree, depending upon where you're looking at it from. So another issue where I am a little bit wondering what, if unless there's some sort of like roadmap saying that we can fix these issues over time, I don't see them becoming a replacement for mini LED or OLED anytime soon.
I think the one key advantage of this television, I mean, it has some advantages in terms of not having so much persistence blur. I think that's one key issue that people have noted with these displays. They also get extremely large, so you can basically build them, I mean, really to any arbitrary size because of the way they're constructed. They don't have the same harsh limits on their construction as, like, let's say an OLED television or even like a mini LED television. You can make them in sizes indeed like this TCL, 163 inches, which is burgeoning on the size of some cinema displays. But there was perhaps another display technology, or so-called supposed display technology, that is perhaps even better suited to large format displays, and that is the so-called laser TV. Now in my notes here I've just written fake.
Yeah.
And this is fake. Why is it fake? It's fake because it's a short throw projector. It is not a television. It's a short throw projector with a projector material, right? So it's going to have all the same limitations that projectors typically have, which is that it can't do HDR. It has poor brightness, relatively dim. It has bad black levels. It has, allegedly, in this case they're advertising it as having a 150-inch size. That's not true. I mean, it might have a 150-inch size for a given distance, right? For a given distance from the projector material, but it's not strictly limited to 150 inches, but you probably wouldn't want to go much bigger than 150 inches, because even at 150 inches, it's quite dim. So this is not really a satisfactory product here, I would have to say. This is a fake TV. It's not a TV. And in this day and age, especially when we think about the sizes of televisions that are coming out now, unless you want a really big display and you don't have much money to spend, I couldn't really recommend a projector for very many people.
No, also just like the inherent chromatic aberration in the image that we saw. We did see it running at higher refresh rate, I think. It was just like really, I don't understand what the purpose was. It was basically like a projector, and you know, it's kind of questionable quality. We also kind of hilariously saw it running an Xbox Series X playing Halo 4.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
It must have just been someone who really, really loved Halo 4. But that's what it was. That's how you'd want to use this laser TV, I guess.
Yeah, a pretty beleaguered console. Actually, I saw two Xbox Series X's on the show floor. I did not see any PlayStation 5s. Actually, Sony did not have any presence at CES whatsoever, it seemed like. It's certainly not their PlayStation brand, certainly not their televisions, which is a curious change from last year. Last year they had a massive booth.
It was huge.
Not a whole lot to show with music and a DJ, and it was very, very loud, and they had some PlayStation set up running Horizon Forbidden West. Nothing too exciting there. They were showing off some monitors as well. Nothing too crazy here. But yeah, Halo 4, a game released on the Microsoft Xbox 360, a 20-year-old, 21-year-old almost console running a game that is, 13, 14 years old? On a console that's 5 years old and you know, not doing so hot in the market, but they did not get this impression perhaps. I suspect this probably came down to one booth employee who had a very strong view as to the strength of 343 Industries, aka Halo Studios now, first Halo entry.
Right, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Who knows?
I wanted to look at some mini LEDs as well, but it seemed like the mini LED vendors were not out in as much of a full force effort as they were last year. Last year, the mini LED panel makers were very happy to advertise their extremely large mini LED panels. There are 100-inch mini LED panels, there are 115-inch mini LED panels. They were really nice, really exciting, and I think they had good image quality characteristics when you consider how much of an impact 115 inches makes when you're sitting in front of it. There were some mini LED panels on display this year, but the focus really seemed to be on the microRGB panels.
Right.
On the OLEDs to a lesser extent. Even on the micro-LED panels. Not so much on the bog standard, you know, Yeoman mini LED panel, even though they're still perfectly good, and even though, in my mind, it's not clear that at least the current incarnation of micro-RGB televisions is necessarily better than mini LED televisions, at least again as they're currently constructed. I understand the baseline technology might be a better technology, but it's not necessarily going to end up in current products that way. We didn't actually see a whole lot of mini LEDs.
No. In fact, we commented it right as we got out of the LG booth. We were like, wait, did we even look at a mini LED in there? And we're like, no.
Yeah. But Alex, perhaps more important than any particular piece of TV technology that we saw in actual panels, and certainly more important than any particular television that we saw on the show floor, even the incredible LG W6, is the display signaling standards that actually drive modern televisions.
Right.
And we actually had a little visit from the HDMI forum and their great booth here. They were actually showing off something that does not really photograph incredibly well, but it's the HDMI 2.2 standard cables, aka HDMI Ultra 96 cables. So why don't you explain exactly what we saw with these HDMI cables and what makes them significant for next generation computers, next generation video game consoles potentially, and certainly the displays of the future.
Yeah, basically here we're seeing, right now we're limited to display ports max and then HDMI 2.1's max stuff. We're talking about like 4K 165 with display port for a lot of televisions, or 4K 120 with HDMI 2.1 for a lot of things, not including DSC compression to boost that up to like 4K 240. So we're going to need, if we want to push refresh rates and resolution higher, we can talk about how useful that all is in a second. We're going to need a new general standard between PC and console and other devices, and that's where HDMI 2.2 comes in. The biggest upgrade is going to come from the Ultra 96 version of HDMI 2.2, which will offer greater bandwidth for things like HDR at higher resolutions at higher refresh rates with no chroma subsampling, which is kind of what we want for the future, for future devices. Right now, there are no devices that can even power this. So the display booth here is literally just cables and none of the content and none of the televisions and none of the devices that are actually going to be powering this in the future. But as I mentioned, I said Ultra 96. Well, that's because now HDMI 2.2, kind of like DX12, has like sub versions, and there's like essentially they're wrapping in HDMI 2.0 and 2.1 into the 2.2 standard, and they have like different names under them. I can't remember the exact ones off the top of my head, but HDMI 2.2 actually encompasses kind of like, it's a superset. It encompasses actually older versions of HDMI 2.0.
Yeah.
But 2.2 was kind of cool because one thing that I really liked is that the gentleman who we were talking to didn't say too much to us, but he handed me a cable, and I was like, "What's the maximum cable length?" And he said, "Did he say 300 meters or?"
300 meters.
He said 300 meters, which Oliver and I can attest to this with HDMI 2.1. We have had a lot of trouble getting HDMI 2.1 cables to perform uniformly, I would say. Like sometimes you can buy one and it may be dithering the signal in a way that isn't great for our tools. After a certain distance, it actually may not function well. John has dealt with this issue before with his setup, which is a bit further away from stuff like his PCs. I don't have actually a great HDMI 2.1 cable standard experience so far. And here it seems like 2.2 could actually make that a much better situation with you as a consumer buying something and maybe not being afraid that after a certain distance it won't work too well.
Yeah, though that was with fiber optic cables and a chip on both ends,
Yeah,
so that would
some
probably
sort of
be
amplification.
a pretty expensive cable, I have to imagine. So I don't actually expect HDMI 2.2 products to hit the market for some years. I'd be even surprised if the PS6 is an HDMI 2.2 product. I really don't think it'll be here for a while, and I think the kinds of refresh rates that are contemplated by HDMI 2.2 probably need some considerable advancement in televisions to actually hit when you're talking about 240 hertz, 40 hertz refresh rates.